Ride on, my Writhing Beast Hulks. It's Man-Sant, and today we are celebrating. That's right, Levia has closed up this ProQuest season with not just one win, but actually 2 wins, finally putting herself on the Living Legend leaderboard. So shout out to Shang Tsung, who took down a ProQuest with an older version of my build, with a Romping Club still, but then I actually went ahead and took down a ProQuest with an objectively worse build using Bone Basher. So we're living the dream here. You know, the meme is a reality. We finally got ourselves some points. So now that the League of Levias is at least somewhat respectable, we've gone ahead and launched a bit of merch for us all to take home and rep at our local game stores and rep at all these big events and just indoctrinate as many people as we can into the League of Levia. So if you're keen on picking up any pins or any stickers or any other products that I've got on the website, that would be great. You know, I've never asked for money on the channel. I don't have a Patreon. I don't have a way to set up donations or anything like that. You know, it's more of a personal choice. I don't really believe that it's worth asking for money until I'm comfortable in the quality of content, in that I know I've given it my all, and I know that I've taken it beyond just like a personal project that I do in my free time to something that I'm more serious about. And I think we're finally getting there, especially since Legend Story Studios has reached out and had me actually do the Uprising Gauntlet series that you'll see on the official Fab YouTube channel pretty soon. So I think we're finally there. We're finally done it. I finally feel comfortable asking for ways to support the channel. And especially with my personal life, I'm moving right now, and any additional funds would be of great assistance. So now that that's out of the way and I'm done shilling for all that garbage, we've got another heap of garbage to actually look at, and that is the deck in front of you here. Now, I'm only half joking. I do think this version of the list that I won a ProQuest with was probably the worst version I've ever played, but it still was enough to take it down. And honestly, if you want to go back and watch any of the grindfest that was this ProQuest, I did stream it, so I'll have a link to that on screen here. But be prepared, it was some long games. Now, before we really look at the entirety of the deck and every card choice that went into it, I've gone ahead and laid out like the different facets of what makes this deck work. Because I think if we understand conceptually what the deck's trying to do, what it does that's so unique, we'll actually be able to understand better, you know, when every card's laid out in front of us, why they're there, and things won't look so goofy. So at its core, we're playing a slower, grindy weapon deck, you know, kind of similar to what you'd think like OG Bravo plays as, but we've got some different tools in the works that makes the deck pretty unique, I think. But really, its weapon is the mainstay of the turn-by-turn strategy, and that is this ability to just turn any yellow or blue pitch card into something that's worth 4 damage. And 4 damage is a fantastic rate, right? That's what every aggressive deck is trying to push for its cards. If it can trade every one of its cards for 4 damage, and then a defensive deck is trading every one of its cards for like 3 damage, then the aggressive deck comes out on top, and that's how they seal the game, right? So when we turn a card into 4 damage, we don't necessarily do it in such a wide fashion, because we're not a deck that gets a lot of go again. In fact, that's really not the point of the build at all. Instead, we're trying to just abuse the fact that still coming in for 4 every turn is a relevant breakpoint, and by taking the game longer and swinging the weapon more and more and more, we're abusing this really good rate of a card just over the entirety of a game to chip down an opponent and get them into really great lock states where things like Pummel, Barraging Beatdown, and Reckless Swing just straight end the game. So that's kind of the core concept, right? But beyond that, we can then start to incorporate these other packages to supplement this longer grind strategy. So one of the first things to talk about in playing a long game is the fact that Tunic becomes invaluable. So Tunic has this really fun interaction with this deck, where once you get it to 3 counters, you can do this amazing play line where you get to pitch a blue for one of your 2 cost attacks, which will leave you with 1 resource floating. So when you come in with something like a Hungering Slaughter Beast, and you've pitched a blue with 1 resource and the Tunic up, you are threatening Pummel. Now, Pummel has natural synergies with Bone Basher, because Bone Basher is a club, but when you set up these play patterns of turning, you know, any of your 2 cost attacks into potential Pummel threats, it is really, really oppressive for your opponent. And you can get some really strong flip turns in with even more additional hit effects like pummeling a Command and Conquer, for example. But basically, you get to spend Tunic, spend that floating to go ahead, toss a pummel on top of your attack, and just weave in mountains of damage in between your grindy turns with Bone Basher, and you just do it all super efficiently. Because if you look at how a Guardian is playing pummel, it is just not at that same small hand size efficiency that you can pull off with Brute, because they have more expensive attacks. They have to keep more cards, whereas we can just pull it all off with a blue, one of these, and Tunic up, and that's just fantastic. So you've got a lot of 2-cost attacks to supplement those big in-between turns that you're going for. Hungering Slaughter Beast is one that is really the main reason to play Levia over Rhinar in this kind of strategy. And that's because Hungering Slaughter Beast comes in for 7. And coming in for 7, basically, if you think about it this way, means you're turning your yellow pummels into red pummels. You're turning your blue pummels into yellow pummels when they target Hungering Slaughter Beast, because they're coming through for that 1 additional damage. And this is a game of inches, so the 1 damage really is relevant. If you switch to Rhinar, you're just losing out on potentially 3 damage over the course of the game, and that's just a straight downgrade. Then, of course, you've got Command and Conquer, the best card possible to pummel. If you can set up potentially 2 CNCs with pummel over the course of the game, there's almost no deck coming back from the value grind that you just presented them. Swing Big is also another fantastic card for the strategy because it's just worth so much card efficiency-wise. I mean, it comes in 2 for 8, and if you pummel on top of that, I mean, you're trading all of a sudden 3 cards for 12 damage with the pummel hit effect. I mean, Swing Big gets crazy with this strategy. And then Pack Hunt, which is relatively just filler, but it is an Intimidate, which can stack with some other things. So that's kind of the in-between core that you're going to try to push for, and what makes this deck have a unique play pattern at all because of the pitching and the Tunic and all that. So that's your hit effects. That's how you overcome a lot of just an aggro deck that wants to just non-interact with you and just throw cards at you. Well, when you take these cards in, you're going to be able to force them to discard, force them to have bad turns, and just push overwhelming damage that can accelerate the kind of endgame state that this deck really loves. So speaking of the endgame state, this deck runs a lot of Barraging Beatdowns. That's because Barraging Beatdown in a slow, grindy strategy is just fantastic in that you get to pitch these cards to the bottom of your deck. You don't necessarily want to use them in that first cycle. You can, when you're against an aggro deck, just play out a Barraging Swing Club and try to just come in for 8, because most of the time they'll just take it. But one of the main things you can do to just guarantee win the game is when you're playing slow and pitching your Barragings together in a clump at that end game, you can draw hands that you set up of triple Barraging, potentially even quadruple Barraging with Arsenal, and just play them all out, pitch into your club, and just seal the game, even if your opponent was at 12 life. It's pretty crazy. So the slower your opponent plays, the more you just set up these inevitable win conditions with full Barraging hands. So this super strong package. But kind of in line with playing slower for Tunic and setting up these big turns, in line with grinding with a weapon, in line with stacking Barragings, is this entire slower defensive package that you bring in to really make the games last longer, right? And that is, for this version of the deck, Unmovables, red and yellow, mainly because Starvo is still around. Sigil in particular is really strong in turning your 2-card hands into still really good trades, because you get to swing Bone Basher for 4 still, right? You're not wasting a card out of deck doing that, and you're still coming in at a breakpoint, and then you're spending Sigil to just heal 3. And that in a way is better than coming in with a different version of a 2-card hand where you swing in with some attack for 7, pitching a card. I mean, yes, it was still 7 damage presented, but you missed out on the efficiency of a weapon swing. You might as well swing weapon. So I quite like Sigil for that. But it also has use in overcoming weird things that are hard to block this format, like Rosetta, or a lot of Prism shields, or with Wizard, just being able to heal up feels really good as well. So big fan of Sigil. Then we've got the Sink Belows, the Fate for Scenes. There's just no reason not to run these, especially in the way that this deck is trying to set up the late game, with sinking cards, with opting and putting it on the bottom. These are just fantastic, fantastic. And then you've got the more unique brute cards that add to the defensive package. Number one being Bonehead Barrier. Now this one I'm only running right now because we are in a format where Rosetta is like really hard to block. Also a lot of just weird breakpoints coming through everywhere when you're against like Chain or even like Wizard, Prism again. Bonehead Barrier, the prevention of damage over the entirety of your turn rather than just like that one single attack that you'd have to sink like a defense reaction into, can actually feel pretty good, and it's playable off Tunic. So I'm running Bonehead Barrier in this version just to add to this defensive package, and it still pitches yellow to swing club, which is decent. And then you have Reckless Swing. Now, Reckless Swing isn't really used for the defense reaction portion of its ability, but more so to just add this guarantee of closing the game out. That's because with Barraging Beatdowns, with your pummels, especially the fact that you can pummel club as well, you should be closing out the game proactively, not necessarily through Reckless Swing, but just by having one Reckless Swing in your deck and being able to pitch in things like Wrecker Romp or any other sixes next to it, just gives you some inevitability in that, okay, if I get my opponent to this 2-life threshold, I can just commit to full defense and I just know that I will draw into lethal at some point. And that insurance just feels really good. So you can already see like those different facets I was talking about of what this deck is doing that's super unique. The intimidation stack, the pummel cost curve, the defensive threat with the inevitability of Reckless is all super unique to Brute over another like control style slow deck like Dash or Bravo. So I have a lot of fun playing this deck. Like I said, you can find the games on my most recent stream if you really want to see the gameplay. But now we're just going to jump into what the cards are actually what the cards actually are in this deck, so we can talk about ratios and yada yada. All right, now that we understand what the deck's going for, we can finally look at the entirety of it here, and it is a little wonky, tell you what. And like I said, not the best version I've played. It was just what I brought on the day, and I just had things go my way. So on the top left here, we've got the pummel targets that we were talking about, that's central to the strategy of playing slower, getting your Tunic up, and then using your Tunic for these amazing in-between turns to take tempo away from your opponent and smack them with strong hit effects. So between your 2-cost attacks and your pummels, these are things that you really need to look for arsenaling while your Tunic ticks up to 3. On those in-between turns, you can find room to put defense reactions there, but these are pretty much your core. And especially Command and Conquer. This is the one that if you can have an arsenal to just know that when you have the blue, the Tunic, and draw into one of your pummels, that you're just kind of good to go. Yeah, this one's good. So from this pummel core, we've got 3 Hungering Slaughter Beast, like I'd mentioned before. This is a breakpoint one that is pretty relevant in just winning the game of inches. I would say you normally only play 2 per game though. You normally play the first one because you just don't have anything, at risk of banishing like Blood Debt wise. And then you probably block with your second one. And then the third one you play just because you're probably getting light on pummel targets and you just kind of have to do it. Or you just block with it. It's not the biggest deal. But whenever I play out that like second or third one, I just never even think of hitting Blood Debt, just pretend it doesn't happen. And so far I've been lucky enough that I think it's only happened like once in every game I've played. So yep, just a breakpoint pummel target. Already talked about Command and Conquer. Card's just insane to hit with pummel. This is the one that is the most important to Arsenal, like I mentioned. Yeah, wow, card's just really good. Swing Big, another fantastic pummel target. It is wildly above rate, coming in 2 for 8. And the Quicken token, I don't think it's ever been relevant. If my opponent actually blocks this out, even if it's just a 2-card hand without the pummel threat, the Quicken token that it gives, and I've even got like a chicken token, give me a second to find it, that I'd love to toss at my opponents, oh, you didn't take damage, you're a little chicken. They haven't really they just don't really do anything with it. There's some slower like Bravo decks that could maybe use it to swing with weapon and then something else, but really it's just never come up. So it's just a fantastic rate pummel target and blocks 3, thank goodness. We've got Pack Hunt. This is the weakest of the bunch. because there's no hit effect, no breakpoint, but the Intimidate can stack with other Intimidates, and it can make it really awkward if you do have the Pummel on it for your opponent to like kind of hedge against Pummel, play around Pummel. When they're down that one card you intimidated, right, you're limiting their options. And if they're trying to play around Pummel, they need to commit extra cards on top, over blocking this, and you just took away a card. So it can make things a little tricky for them. So it's decent, blocks 3, right? It's all good. Then you've got the other attackers here. Beast Mode is hot garbage. I was trying this card just because I wanted to see if it actually did anything. And the whole idea was in late game, when you have all these other Intimidates coming through, like in your Barragings or all these Bellows, you might as well get a free buff out of it. With Beast Mode, that literally never came up. Never. It was completely worthless. If I ever played this card out, it was just like a 2-card hand for 6 because I had nothing else to do. And for that, it's just worse than like Smash Instinct. So I would switch Smash Instinct over this like in a heartbeat. It's what I was running before. Night Strike is a fantastic card though, because this one just gives you that little oomph of go again that is really strong for when you do take away tempo from your opponent off the back of like a Command and Conquer Pummel turn, and you just have this big hand. Well, what do you do with it? Enlightened Strike gives you a way to just bottom those really great red cards that you're trying to save for late game into giving this go again into even just like a club swing or following up with something else. Card just super versatile, really, really strong. Then you've got your Wrecker Romps, and this is not something you ever attack with. It's just a blue 6, but the reason you run it is mainly because you're pitching these in pretty often back into your deck, and then you're running Reckless as well. So just the ease of having a blue 6 that you're pitching back anyway alongside Reckless is just some really good synergy there. And of course, popping Phantasm, sure, is the other reason it's in there. So that's the attacks, that's Reckless Swing. Then we've got the 9 Pummels. God, I wish there were more cards like this. I mean, at this point, with Classic Battles, we even got like a worse version of Razor Reflex. I would take a worse version of Pummel. Just give me more attack reaction hit effect cards. My God, they're so strong, so good, and the threat of them just completely warps the game. As soon as your opponent clues in on what your strategy is and how many of these you're playing, they are checking your discard constantly. They are constantly thinking about, my goodness, he's played 2 reds. Is this the turn he has? The next one, I saw him pitch 1 yellow, but he's keeping a big hand. Like, is he going to double Pummel? If he does, is it double yellow or blah, blah, blah? Like, it just gets nuts with what your opponent's thinking about because you just run this many Pummels in your deck. So, card's just fantastic anyway. The fact that it hits club is also incredibly strong to just force damage out of nowhere. The hit effects on these guys, incredible card. Incredible card. Then we've got the Barraging Beatdowns, another 9 of them. This is because this is that inevitability for late game against the slower or mid-range decks where you have the ability to kind of pitch stack purposefully. Against aggro, you kind of just block first, pitch stack second. But against a lot of the mid-range decks, control decks, you pitch stack first and do everything else secondary. So having so many in your deck just lets you concentrate them really well, especially when you can get the reds back in because of like the E-Strikes or the Sinks and Fates, or just even pitching like double red for a club or something. It's just really strong. And they buff your weapon, which is just so good for the late game like efficiency of playing out hands where you can like triple barraging, pitch that last card for club, push a ton of damage. Very, very strong. But then alongside these barragings, we've got all these bellows. And at this point, it's kind of crazy. You can run so many that basically just do the same thing. You've got Clearing Bellow from Classic Battles that just intimidates, High Roller that just intimidates, and Awakening Bellow that costs 1, intimidates, and gives +1 on attack actions. You're running these just to supplement the barragings because, when you pitch all the stuff back in your deck, say you've got like a, double yellow barraging, but you're missing that last other color barraging, well, now it's fine. You've got one of these that you can play alongside and still push the +6 from the double yellows or whatever it was. So they're just extra intimidates that try to go hand in hand with tying together your barraging turns, but they don't really do anything like tempo-wise. They're just block fodder, pitch fodder, whatever. They're just kind of funny. Then we've got all the defense reactions. Right now, like I mentioned, I'm running the yellow unmovables because of Starvo as well. But those are definitely something you can switch out. Yellow unmovables, red unmovables, red Sink Belows, red Fate for Scenes, these beautiful Taiwanese promos. These are just so core. Defense reactions are incredibly strong, and they're another part of the deck that your opponent really starts to think about and count your resources down for, because you don't see many decks that are running this many pummels, this many defense reactions, right? So it just adds stress to your opponent because you're playing these in specific windows, right? Attack reactions, defense reactions, and that's going to play with how much information your opponent gets, like face up. So really, really strong. Just have the plethora of options here in all the defense. Then we've got This Round's on Me. Now this is just another blue that I'm running that just blocks 3 for the most part. But when you do play it out, there's like 3 cases where it's legitimately good. Number 1 is if you're going first turn 0, you can just play out This Round's on Me and then just swing with like an attack or a club or something. And if they take the damage, cool. I mean, yeah, they're going to keep like a larger hand, but the -1 on This Round's on Me is incredibly relevant. So if they take that damage to play out the 5-card hand, you don't mind having a complete off turn, right? Because you're trying to build around your Tunic 3. So if you play this turn 1, or your turn 0, you've got your Tunic at 1, right? Your Tunic's at 1. You played This Round, so they took the damage, try to do some big turn, you just fully block and are now aided by the -1 in actually blocking all the damage. It goes back to you, you just have a do-nothing turn, which is fine. You tick up your Tunic into their turn, where they hopefully expended like a huge amount of resources last turn, trying to push through with like a 5-card hand. So you get to like block with like 2 cards, whatever it is. Now it goes back to you, Tunic 3, and you're threatening pummel already. So playing This Round's on turn 0 like actually comes up a lot. It's really good in playing towards the pace that you want. But then against specific heroes like Prism and Katsu, it does a lot of work as well, because obviously against Prism, it's going to shut off like all their shields and auras from dealing damage. And we'll get to that matchup specifically in a bit, but that's really strong in just stalling out and letting you potentially win the game through aura clear. And then also Katsu in just turning off the Kodachis. I mean, yeah, he draws a card, but when he becomes easier to block, the extra card's like not that much of a big deal. And he doesn't get the free like mask threat with the Kodachis. So This Round's legitimately actually good card. Then we've got the Sigil of Solace, which just adds to the defensive package. It helps with all the weird breakpoints that you don't necessarily get to cover up each time, because you don't have any more of these beautiful red defense reactions. You just have Sinks and Fates. So when you block with those 3s and leak damage, Sigil kind of heals you back up. It's not that great against like the hit effect decks, but even so, I just tend to like always run Sigil, because I just like having 9 free health over the course of the game, and this is very much like a 2nd or even 3rd cycle deck. So you are going to see the Sigils, you are going to play them through, and you can even get cheeky by pitching them quietly back into your deck. Your opponent doesn't even like see them if it's through in Lightning Strike and Sinks and Fates, and then you just draw into, you know, them mid-game with your 2nd cycle and just completely flip the game on your opponent. You got your value out of Skull Cap already, you know, playing the first run through of your deck, and then you come back with the Sigils and your opponent's like, holy crap, I kept so many cards to try to push lethal, but then there he goes, he's back to, you know, 9 life again. It's pretty cool. Sigil actually adds a lot to the deck. I really like it. And then you've got Bonehead Barrier, which just helps right now, kind of similarly to Sigil, except this one is going to prevent the hit effects, because it prevents the damage. It doesn't just like heal you back up from the breakpoints you missed. And you can play it off Tunic. And so I only run 2 because you don't really want to interrupt your game plan of using Tunic on this stuff too much, but it definitely can come up, and it's really huge in preventing some other types of damage as well, like through Dominates. Bonehead can just be nuts. I never really expect to roll more than like a 3 on this card. If you roll a 1 or a 2, obviously that's a pretty big low roll, but if you roll even a 3, this card really does work. Like it's legitimately good. And sometimes with Tunic, if you're really on the back foot and playing against like a really hard aggro deck and you don't even get to set up your pummel turns very well, then you might as well use your Tunic for something, right? And that something is Bonehead Barrier. So quite like this card. And then in this tournament specifically, I was running 1 Remembrance because I knew that this area was very keen on running OG Bravo. I knew some players were going to be on it. So I took Remembrance because I wanted extra insurance and being able to concentrate the barragings late game. But this is not a card I would normally run per se. But this is the ProQuest winning list. It is so strange that this deck did it, but I think what this deck really does is kind of test your opponent's fundamentals. Because if you know what you're doing with this deck, then it has really clear play lines for you as the pilot. You're setting up specific arsenal targets. You know what your turn cycles are ideally. You know where to find your like full blockout turns. You know where to find your like partial blockout turns, swing club. You know where to find your like full keep for some crazy double pummel play, whatever it is. You just start feeling like really natural with the deck because the play lines become, I don't want to say like obvious because I don't think this deck's necessarily easy to play, but the play lines for it are nothing like random compared to how like Art of War or Blood Rushes can be with other versions of Levia, where there's a lot of unknown information on your turn. With this kind of deck, everything's there for you. There's no like randomness to draws, there's no randomness to discards or whatever. So I really like the agency it gives you in playing this deck well. So yeah, really enjoy it. I think for this metagame, it was surprisingly better than I thought. I mean, Shang Tsung, when he played this, was fatiguing chains left and right. I've also found that it does do very well against chains, even if they take the Eclipse package, because you just so efficiently kill Urser by, you know, just having one of these 6 attacks or even like a barraging in arsenal from early in the game. You can just, you know, play it out, kill Urser, and then you're just like a block 12 deck with extra defense reactions to help with math and Bonehead and Sigil. And yeah, you just have a decent matchup there. And then against Starvo, you actually, I think, are pretty favored. I've grinded through so many Starvos that this deck just like kind of seals the late game against a Starvo, where you just throw these big amounts of damage at each other back and forth. You deal the same amount with your weapons, so you're not really trying to be a weapon deck. You're trying to actually play more aggressively with these attacks, even off like 2-card hands. But then you get to the point where his damage, the Starvo's damage, is like telegraphed. Sometimes they run Pummel, but you can normally track it really well when they would have Pummel because they're such a card-intensive deck. But you're not. You can hide a lot more information than a Starvo can when you get into the late game, and they have to be afraid first of your Pummel threat, of your Reckless, of your barraging stack, whereas you don't have to be as afraid of what the Starvo can just rip off the top when you've got your defense reactions and stuff set up. So that matchup also felt pretty good. The one big matchup that was an issue in this metagame more than anything was Prism. And Prism is actually a good segue here because we're going to have to take a look at the equipment to really dive into what you do in that matchup. So we'll move right along. So looking at the equipment here, there's a couple things that just don't change in this iteration of the deck, and that is Skullcap, Tunic, and Scabskins. Those are just coming into every matchup. Skullcap is just blocking that 3, baby. Tunic is giving you those pummel lines, and then Scabskins is also blocking 3 and giving you the rolls for the Prism matchup specifically. So where things start to change is with the weapons and the arm slots. You're going to take Bone Basher into everything except for Runeblades, Wizard, and Prism. Against Prism, you are taking double Mandible Claw, and that's because your win con against Prism is actually to fatigue out their auras, which sounds crazy, but when you take double Mandible Claw and don't have to deal with something like Blood Debt, you actually have the ability to just very slowly and meticulously play through every single one of their auras and run them out of things to do. It's crazy. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it is very possible. Your Scabskins just have to treat you nice. Not even like, you know, more than normal, but like a 50-50 shot with Scabskins throughout the course of a game is enough for you to just completely comb through the Prism's auras and win. That's in conjunction with like Bonehead, Sigil, and the This Round's on Me to protect you from their shield spam. And then every once in a while clearing their shields with something like Pummel on your big attacks to just reset the board a bit. So that's your win con there. It's what you got to go for. Otherwise, you're taking a single Mandible Claw and the Arcane Lantern and the Null Rune gloves versus all the Rune Blades and Wizard. Wizard, it's obvious you just need some Null Rune. This version doesn't have Skullhorn in it. But against the Rune Blades, the reason you need to go this route is because otherwise Rosetta is just impossible to block out. If you take the double Null Rune, then at least you can pitch into the Rosetta if you really need to shut it off, or if they're trying to like proc Spellbound Creepers, you can pitch into the double null rune here, and they just won't have a way to overcome that because, you know, they need to have dealt arcane for their spellbounds to stick. So that's a cool feature there. But really, it's because the reason you have to go this route is because there's no way you race the rune blades. There's no way you play a fair kind of trade game with the rune blades. You have to truly commit to grinding out all of their broken cards. Like against Viserai right now, you just need to play through as much of his free rune generation as you can, play through his Revels, play through his Mauvrian Skies, and then he kind of just loses things to do. And you just grind him out and win because his deck just stops presenting the damage it should. Against Briar, it's a lot harder because of Channel Mount Heroic, but at least against Briar, you actually can flip the game pretty well with like a CNC pummel and just disrupt her finite resources. But same deal, you need to just grind through all of her good stuff. And so for that, you take the double null rune, do the same thing. I don't think it's as important to really take double null rune. If you think they're on Spellbound, then you probably should. But if you don't think they are, then you can get away with Goliath Gauntlet for sure in that matchup. But then looking at the actual gloves here, you take Goliath into everything except Prism. Prism, you're taking the Gambler's Gloves, and then the Null Rune Gloves are into the Wizards and the Rune Blades, right? But that's the equipment suite. I don't think it's anything too special. I mean, I wasn't running Skullhorn, and you'll see in the stream if you watch it, I did lose to a Kano kind of because of that. I was in a really weird spot because I actually had turned on Skullcap and was in a position where I really could just kind of stop swinging and just make the game a draw because I would just pitch into Skullcap and just fatigue him out that way. But, you know, that's not a really great way to go about it. So we kept playing the game through. Skullcap eventually was turned off and I just lost. But if you take the Skullhorn, I'm not entirely sure it really makes the Wizard matchup any better for you because you're a very slow deck that doesn't put on that much pressure, especially against like the way Wizard plays into Null Rune 4 type decks where they just pitch their perfect turn and then kill you anyway. So I don't even think you should really bother with trying to make the Wizard matchup better. It's just not good. So that's what we've got for the equipment here, but now we'll talk about a bit of sideboarding. So in sideboarding, I've come to understand it best as just taking out the cards you don't need for your respective matchup. And I think this helps a lot mentally in visualizing, okay, my deck is 70 cards, which it is in this example. So I can remove up to 10 cards to present a full 60 in each matchup. So let me just comb through my deck and remove the stuff I just don't need. And in this deck in particular, I was never super concerned with getting down to 60 cards. In fact, in talking to Sheng Tsung, he never, like on purpose, was going down to 60 cards just because of the potential like fatigue as a win con. And that's a pretty smart angle to take it, honestly. So I would be, you know, very specific, very purposeful about why you're taking out the cards you are for each matchup. Now, like the main thing that I was always looking to take out, for example, for the ProQuest was Remembrance. I just like didn't run it into almost anything except like the OG Bravo that I played against because that's why I brought it. And if I saw an old him, it'd be the same thing. Then like this round's on me. It is just a blue block 3, but if you're concerned about the consistency of like your command and conquers, like your pummels and that kind of thing, you just don't need this card in a matchup where you can't get any use out of like the -1 or it's not that beneficial, like some of those mid-range decks. So if you care about the consistency of your pummel, like you know it's going to be like a bit of a tighter game, then you know these should come out because they're just not really doing anything but just blocking in like a kind of mid-range matchup. Like for example, Rhinar. Like you just don't need these. The only thing they're doing is blocking 3, and they'd only be doing it inconsistently because of how like Intimidate works, right? So just don't need this in every matchup. The Unmovables, they're mainly here for Starvo. You know, not every deck goes that tall. So, you know, just decide whether you think they're worth it or not. They can still be good against some of the wider, shorter decks, like even Katsu, because if they're trying to go over the top with like a Razor Reflex, you can really punish with one of these. So the Unmovable is like pretty contextual. It's a card that still benefits the idea of setting up for second cycle because you can pitch into it, pitch in like a blue barraging or something like that, blue pummel. and still set up the deck as you play defensive through the first cycle. So I wasn't really taking these out, except you know, sometimes like the yellows. When you're against Prism, actually, is when you need to take out defense reactions overall, because even stuff like the Sinks and Fates, which otherwise like only really come out against Wizard, are just not that useful with how Prism attacks. So against like Prism specifically, you just want to cut all the just clunky red defense reactions. So like Sinks, Fates, red unmovables, they all go. I keep the yellows in just in the off chance they're still running Library, and the fact that it can, you know, be played from hand to block like Miraging Metamorph or something that you don't want to pop. And it's just a yellow, so it still pays for club. So the sideboarding is like really not anything to really take notes on, like really just feel out how you like to play the games into your opponents. Like I was changing things on the day. I still change things on the regular when I sideboard with this kind of deck, because I'm still not convinced just playing like a 70 card deck is correct. It doesn't feel good. It messes with the consistency of the specific like tunic lines you're going for. But at the same time, like if you just have more cards in your deck than a grindy mid-range matchup, you just come out ahead because your weapon's just like nuts. So yeah, it's something that I'm still trying to perfect here, but that's how I'd go about it. Just shave down to you know, remove the cards that you just don't think are doing anything for you in whatever matchup. So actually on to potential changes for Uprising. So there are 4 cards that I'm heavily considering moving into Uprising here. And, you know, we don't know anything about this metagame yet, so take this with a grain of salt. But first and foremost, I'm actually pretty keen on running Pursuit of Knowledge if Dromai and Phi are increasingly popular. Maybe even it's good into Icelander just as an extra blue. But the idea behind Pursuit of Knowledge, at least against Dromai, is you can hit the dragons, kill something with Pursuit of Knowledge, and gain the intellect, right? Because this only cares about hitting, not hitting a hero. So just the free ability to draw larger hands could be pretty cool. Also against Phi in particular, if he's a deck that obviously just does not want to block at all, and also is hard pressed to use his armor to block, because it looks like he's having a lot of the same blade break as Katsu did. So if you do get to return with like a Pursuit of Knowledge, maybe even like hit it with a pummel, because it is a 2 cost against Phi, I think most likely this is just always going through. So that's pretty interesting. We'll see if that extra card draw is really worth it, but overall this could be potentially 3 new matchups where Pursuit of Knowledge is legitimate. And if they're popular enough, then sure, definitely giving this card a shot, even though it's from Welcome to Wrath, or Welcome Wraith. Then we've got a couple cards here that I don't have in person yet, but I think Findel's Fighting Spirit, I think as the red in particular coming in for 7 off of just like a blue pitch, is pretty good. Like aggressive-wise, that's the same as what a Smash Instinct was doing for you, and that card was pretty good when I was running it before. But also the ability to heal 1 is really interesting, specifically against Rosetta Thorn, and probably Phi, but I don't know how we play into him just yet. But against Rosetta Thorn, you're always hard-pressed to turn 1 card into preventing 3 of the Rosetta damage, because it's just so inefficient, right? Like there's 2 physical, there's 2 arcane coming at you. Your card should be worth 3, but you can't really make it be worth 3 against Rosetta. Findel's Fighting Spirit actually does fix that. You take the arcane first, then you can block with Findel's Fighting Spirit. If you are lower, then you gain a life, right? Which is effectively, as long as it wasn't lethal, the same as blocking 3. So I think that card has merit. I think if Briar's really good and like Illusionist is really good, then like, you know, it's another popper. It's good into the Rosetta, like I mentioned. I'm interested in trying that one out because yeah, it's just it's a card that should be decent. Then the next one to think about here would actually be the new defense reaction, like That All You Got, or whatever it's called, the new yellow. It being a yellow block 3 is just always decent in a deck that can use club, but its ability to potentially draw a card after blocking something small can be really great for how your turn cycles play out with this deck. I mean, to full block a turn and then draw up a card and just cheat in 4 damage off a club sounds really strong. So It depends whether or not like this will ever really proc. It depends how small the little chains are coming out of like Phi or whatever else is in the metagame. So it's something to just test in the same vein as like Fighting Spirit. I'm not really sure where it is, but the all-star card of this next set for Club Levia, or for Bone Basher Levia, is 1000% Erase Face. This card is so insane for this deck. This deck needed more hit effects, needed more threats beyond just like Command and Conquer to really flip a game and steal tempo. Erase Face does exactly that. I mean, against some decks, this really just turns them off. And the fact that it's a pummel target, right? It's a 6 to pop Phantasm. Yeah, it's a 2-block, but that's fine. When you play this, it's because you want to play it, not block with it. So really, really excited to toss this in the deck. It's going to be just absolute like bread and butter with how this deck wants to play anyway. So we'll kind of see how the metagame shapes up. There's always more options that this deck can play around with as well, like tossing in Arg Smash if like Dash is really good, tossing in the Skullhorn if you know, Icelander and Kano are still really prevalent. So there's definitely more angles to take. With Starvo being gone and Chain being gone, you do lose 2 matchups that I felt pretty confident in. But you know, deck's still there. Deck's still worth tinkering around with. So yeah, that was the deck tech here. So a little bit late for everyone to try it in ProQuest season now. ProQuest season is already done and wrapped up. But like I said, we at least got 2 wins on the board with it. So the deck's doing something right? Yeah, just have a lot of fun playing it. Hopefully you do as well. So with that, that was Man Sant. I'll catch you in the next one.